Man, the most common, definitely the one thing that I see most consistently has to do with wind more than anything else. And I think that this again goes back to having one thing I loved about studying with Prof is that everything he did was based on concept. It was never based on, you need to do this one thing, you need to do this thing. It was always about concept. You need to have a concept underlying everything and allow that to guide the decisions you make individually to do the things that you want to do and play the things that you hear. And so with that being the case, the concept of addressing just calling it wind instead of calling it air already makes a huge difference.
Right.
And so oftentimes what I found with students is that they're just forgetting to breathe. And when it comes time to play, let's put it in an audition setting. We performed enough to know how to deal with performance anxiety. The idea is that once you go on the stage, about 50% of everything that you know instantly goes out of the window. And so you have to practice in a way to make that additional 50% second nature. So once you get that blank, it doesn't make a difference. The second you blank out, you're still doing something that you can already do by rote. And that's the way we practice. When it comes to wind, that's one of the first things that students and professionals alike tend to forget, especially depending on one style or another. Like jazz is an interesting beast in itself, because once you're improvising, once you're on the page of thinking about that, oftentimes a lot of the basics of playing the instrument simply go away. And you find yourself doing all kinds of things that are considered bad habits and maybe destructive to your playing, that maybe sabotage your ability to play a full set. All of that comes into play the second you're thinking so much about, what line, what chord change is this? What do I want to say over this? So the idea of wind, I ingrain that into my students. And I tell them a story all the time. The thing that Prof did with me and with Sean, and there was another trumpet player, that phenomenal cat named Lee Hogan's at the time. And the thing that Prof did with all of us for the entire first year of our study, he would not allow us to play anything beyond concert F in the staff. That was it, that one note. And if that note was not perfect on demand at the beginning of your lesson, sometimes that's the end of your lesson for the day. And we were, we were hanging out a lot during that first year, and we get around each other, and the Prof let you get past that note. Nah, man, still on that one note. And that was for an entire academic year of study. But what that did to us is force us to learn that you have to breathe in a certain way. And the mistake that most musicians make is after they've taken in their wind, however they breathe in, because that can differ. However you breathe in, you want to instantly put that wind into the instrument, or else it loses the momentum you built up with your inhale. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing that always happens. One habit that's huge is a guy would bring their trumpet to their lips. They're ready to play. They'll take this breath and kind of hold it for a second. And then when it's time to play, release the air. When they do that, what they've done is now taken away whatever power, whatever attack they've built up. Now it's inconsistent. So the first thing that most of my students have to unlearn, or learn rather, is how to create a swing-like effect, like the air goes straight in and straight out. Teaching people how to breathe in rhythm with the music that they're playing. It's almost like yoga. But the idea is, if you have a count in, if they're going to count to 4 and you're coming in on beat 1, then beat number 4 is your breath, and beat number 1 you're playing. And so that just getting them to that point that's a lesson in itself. But that I found that to be almost a universal corrector, because most of what you find is that initial attack is damaged by so many different another portion. When I talk about wind and just moving the wind, the embouchure, sometimes if the embouchure is not prepared before the wind hits it, then it's not going to respond consistently. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes you get a note, sometimes you won't. And so the idea of prepping your embouchure, before you take that breath, not necessarily having everything tightened, but at least having maybe 75% of your embouchure engaged and ready to go before you take that breath, that makes a difference on what consistently happens afterwards. So but still, it's the idea of moving your wind. Most of the times, the good and the bad that happens with the trumpet happens behind your teeth. And so that next portion, having to deal with what you're saying, which dictates the wind. if your wind was traffic, then your tongue is the traffic director, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't have any control over what your tongue is doing, then there's no telling whether or not that wind will even make it past your lips and into the horn. So now the idea becomes to say certain things. And this is where we get to the point of being able to control both your inhale, your exhale, and your sound just by what you say. Mm-hmm. And Prav's whole thing is he had syllables for how you breathe in. Like we could do this now, and you probably already do this, but he breathes in one way that people breathe is saying like ha. Another way is saying ho. But mm-hmm. that H portion of it is what kind of opens up your throat and forces that air in. Mm-hmm. So when you do that, you feel the sensation of the wind coming in. Mm-hmm. That's when you know that you've already got a good habit going. Now that you can feel the air coming in, and that's a consistent thing that you can recreate every time you're about to play. Mm-hmm. And the next thing is just getting that air out. And it's making sure that even from a syllable point of view, that there's nothing between that ha and whatever you say to play. So it's like ha, two, almost like a sneeze, and the air instantly shoots out. And once you get in the habit of doing that, then you get in the habit of creating a consistent sound on demand, a consistent attack on demand. And that can start a chain of events that goes great for you from that point forward. But that's the thing that has to be taught. That's the one thing that I see consistently that's not taught. So by the time I see trumpet players, even adults, even working adults, and they bring up issues of inconsistency, like you said, as a doctor, addressing one thing at a time, I found more often than not, it has to do with how they're initially getting that wind into their instrument. If they don't have a concept of breathing and playing, and they're just kind of going off instinct, then sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. But I guess for my personal career, I've been in so many situations where the red light is on. You have to get it right now or it'll never happen again. It's being recorded, so it'll be immortalized.
Yeah.
They're live on TV. I've been in so many of those situations that I had to force myself and remind myself that this is how I play. Before the count off comes, I need to do this. And every time I kind of pep talk myself into doing the right things, mm-hmm. the right things happen. So, it's that I know that was kind of a long and drawn out answer, but it still leads back to wind and having just a concept,
Yeah. Well, and, it's real interesting that, when you're talking about how, particularly like in the context of playing jazz, so when you're improvising and your mind is so focused on that, and it certainly can happen in any type of musical situation, but mm-hmm. it's so easy to, because your brain only has your brain has thousands. It's processing, I think like it's over 500,000 bits of information every second.
Wow.
Now your conscious mind can only process about 1% of that.
Yeah.
So that's why you basically can only focus on one thing at a time. I mean, that's the definition of focus. So you can really only think about one thing at a time. And when you're really thinking about something, then the things that are going on other than that are part of the default mode network are the things that are ingrained. Those are the habits. Sometimes mm-hmm. they're the habits that you did not consciously choose. They're just, the bad stuff, or it's the habits that you consciously have chosen, dedicated yourself to develop those things so that they're second nature.
Correct.
Because whenever you run into a stressful situation, you will always default to what you know best.
Correct.
Those most ingrained habits. And I think sometimes with problems with breathing, that's one of the things, because we kind of have an ingrained habit. It's an instinctive habit of when you get nervous, you breathe in shallow,
shorter breaths. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's your body's natural reaction. It's part of the fight or flight mechanism. The sympathetic nervous system is getting geared up. So mm-hmm. Being able to have a new paradigm that you have, which is when you're dealing with a stressful situation, or I don't want to say stressful is a bad thing, but when you have to be on, of okay, this is when I need to breathe in deeper
Right.
and fuller. So I need
Right.
to do the opposite of what I normally would, what I would
Exactly.
instinctively do. So developing that new instinct. So that makes complete sense to me from a neuropsych perspective, that,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be the thing that we default to. And then that's the thing that creates this kind of snowball effect where
Exactly.
we develop the anxiety, we have poor performance, and that just creates more and more and more and more. So
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting that that you take it from that approach, because I tell people all the time, the trumpet is such a head game in the end. Like the brass instruments in general are such head games. You have to, you can psych yourself out of doing things you know how to do.
yeah.
But looking on the inverse, you can trick yourself into doing things that you had no idea you can do by simply creating this environment where you're accomplishing what you meant to accomplish. And that's why I spend a great deal of time, not like my professor, but I spend a great deal of time with my students just on the initial breath. Even like people that give speeches professionally, one tactic that they would always tell, amateurs or beginners or novice when it comes to giving a speech, one tactic to get people past their initial anxiety is to get them to kind of shout out the first word of the speech, to kind of try to release as much tension as possible at the beginning of a speech. Mm-hmm. When it comes to trumpet, that first breath, and when you're on a stage rather, or when you're before an audience, that first breath is the most stress that you will have on a gig. If you find a way to get past that initial stress, like you said, it snowballs into doing, the rest of the gig more comfortably. Mm-hmm. And the second breathing, the second that becomes ingrained, that generally tends to create more comfortable performers, or people who are just, that turn out to be more adept to playing. And I like to make it a point to listen to that first note of any performance that I ever listen to, any concert that I get to see, anytime I'm watching a jury or a recital, that first note tends to tell me how the rest of this piece is going to go.
Yeah.
And so, if people can just concentrate on that one step, and there's tons of Disney songs. I have 3 young children, so I've seen every Disney movie under the sun. And there are tons of songs. There are tons of their songs that just address taking that first step, mm-hmm. Taking that one baby move that will, blossom into your adulthood. And I like to think that wind is that thing. And I have seen that consistently work, for nearly every student I've worked with. Mm-hmm. And that kind of opens the door for everything else. So
yeah, I think that sometimes people lose track of